Greg Porter looked out his kitchen window at the perfectly trimmed lawns of Oakwood Heights. 6 months in this neighborhood, and he still wasn't used to how quiet it was compared to their old apartment downtown. He watched his daughter Lily playing, with her stuffed animals on a blanket in the backyard. The portable oxygen tank sat beside her, its thin tube running to the small cannula in her nose. At 9 years old, Lily had already been through more medical procedures than most people face in a lifetime. Greg poured himself another cup of coffee and checked his watch. It was Saturday, his day off from the state attorney's office, and he had promised Lily they would put up decorations for her birthday party next weekend. As he gathered the supplies, he heard the distinct sound of someone clearing their throat at his fence gate. "Excuse me, Mr. Porter." The voice was sharp and carried the fake sweetness that Greg had come to recognize all too well. Nancy Winters stood at the gate in her typical outfit, pressed khaki pants, a polo shirt with the Oakwood Heights HOA logo, and a clipboard clutched to her chest. Her gray hair was cut in a severe bob that matched her personality. "Good morning, Nancy," Greg said, trying to keep his tone friendly. "I notice you're setting up some sort of event," she said, writing something on her clipboard without looking up. "Just my daughter's birthday party next weekend. I sent the request form to the HOA office last month and got approval," Greg explained, walking toward the fence. Nancy's lips thinned into a tight line. "Yes. Well, I'm here about the ramp you installed at the front door. It wasn't approved by the architectural committee." Greg felt his patience wearing thin but kept his face neutral, a skill developed from years in courtrooms. "The ramp is temporary, Nancy. Lily had a procedure last week, and she needs it for her wheelchair and oxygen equipment. I mentioned it in my email to the board. Temporary structures still require approval," Nancy insisted, flipping through her papers. "And while we're discussing violations, your garbage cans were visible from the street on Tuesday." Greg glanced at Lily to make sure she was okay before turning back to Nancy. "I had an emergency hearing that ran late. They were moved to the side yard first thing Wednesday morning. Rules are rules, Mr. Porter. Without them, this community would fall into chaos." Nancy handed him a pink slip of paper. "This is your third notice this month. The board will be discussing fines at our next meeting." Greg took the paper, folded it without reading it, and put it in his pocket. "Is there anything else, Nancy?" "I'd like to get back to my daughter." Nancy's eyes narrowed as she looked past him at Lily and her medical equipment. "That tank doesn't match the approved outdoor fixtures color scheme." Greg stared at her in disbelief. "That's her oxygen tank. She needs it to breathe." "Medical equipment should be kept out of public view," Nancy said, making another note. "Perhaps you should consider a community better suited to your, situation." Before Greg could respond, a friendly voice called from the sidewalk. "Hey there, Greg. How's it going?" Joe Martinez, Greg's neighbor from across the street, approached with a friendly wave. He was in his usual weekend attire, faded jeans, and a baseball cap from the local high school where he taught math. "Morning, Joe," Greg called back, grateful for the interruption. Nancy straightened her already rigid posture. "Mr. Martinez, your holiday lights from 3 months ago are still attached to your gutter." Joe grinned and shrugged. "Yeah, thinking of keeping them up all year. Saves time come December." Nancy's face flushed. "That's against Regulation 17B of the community standards." "Is it?" "Must have missed that one," Joe said, winking at Greg. He turned to Nancy. "Hey, some of us are putting together a petition to revisit the rule about basketball hoops. Mind if I send it your way?" Nancy clutched her clipboard tighter. "Petitions must be submitted through proper channels. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 12 more violation notices to deliver this morning." She turned on her heel and marched down the sidewalk. Joe waited until she was out of earshot before chuckling. "She's something else, isn't she?" Greg sighed. "That's one way to put it." "Don't let her get to you," Joe said. "She does this to everyone new until she finds someone else to bother. Last year she went after the Wilsons for having a bird feeder that was an unauthorized height from the ground." "I'm trying to keep the peace," Greg said, watching Lily. "Moving here was supposed to give Lily stability, better schools, and fresh air. I don't need a neighborhood war." Joe nodded toward Lily. "How's she doing?" "Better. The new medication is helping. Doctor says she might be able to cut back on oxygen during the day if her next tests look good. That's great news, Joe said. Listen, Denise and I want to help. With Lily's party. Just tell us what you need. Thanks, I appreciate that. Greg smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. After Joe left, Greg joined Lily on the blanket. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes, a thought that still squeezed his heart 5 years after Kate's death. Who is that lady? Lily asked, adjusting her cannula. Just someone from the neighborhood group, Greg said, helping her straighten the tube. How are you feeling, Sunshine? Okay. Can we put up the balloons now? Absolutely. Greg helped her, up making sure the oxygen tank was secure as they moved. Let's make this the best birthday ever. Over the next week, Greg found 3 more violation notices taped to his door. One for excessive garden hose visibility, another for unapproved wind chime sound frequency, and a third for improper mailbox flag positioning. Each notice was signed with Nancy's tight, controlled signature. On Wednesday evening, Greg attended the monthly HOA meeting at the community center. As he entered the room, conversations hushed. He recognized most of the faces, neighbors who had brought casseroles when Lily was in the hospital, or who waved from their driveways in the mornings. They weren't the problem. The problem sat at the head table, where Nancy and 4 other board members shuffled papers importantly. Greg took a seat in the back row. The meeting proceeded with mind-numbing discussions about lawn fertilizer schedules and approved shutter colors. Finally, Nancy reached new business on her agenda. We've had several complaints about medical equipment being displayed in yards and on porches, she announced, not looking at Greg but making it clear who she meant. The board proposes an amendment to Section 5 of the Community Guidelines to require all medical devices be screened from public view. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Nancy, are you talking about the Porter girls' oxygen? That seems unnecessarily strict. This isn't about specific residents, Betty, Nancy said. It's about maintaining the aesthetic standards that keep our property values high. Greg stood up. The room went quiet again. My name is Greg Porter. My daughter Lily has pulmonary hypertension, which means her heart and lungs don't work together properly. She needs supplemental oxygen to play outside like any other kid. The tank is FDA-approved medical equipment, not a lawn ornament, Nancy cut in. No one is questioning the medical necessity, Mr. Porter. We're simply suggesting proper screening. Like what? Greg asked calmly. Should I build a box around her? Hide her away so the neighborhood looks perfect in your photos? An older man stood up from the side of the room. I'm Ben Kelly. Lived here 20 years. Nancy, this is ridiculous. We're talking about a little girl's health equipment. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Nancy's face hardened. Perhaps Mr. Porter isn't aware that before purchasing in Oakwood Heights, homebuyers agree to certain standards, she said. If those standards are too burdensome, I'm very aware of the HOA agreement, Greg interrupted. I'm also aware of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, both of which prohibit discrimination based on medical needs. He didn't mention that he had successfully prosecuted 2 such cases in the last year. I'd be happy to provide the board with relevant legal precedents. The room grew tense. One of the other board members, a retired judge named Frank, leaned over to whisper something to Nancy. She frowned, but then forced a smile. We'll table this discussion for now, Nancy said. Moving on to the community picnic planning. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Greg to offer support. Betty, the woman who had spoken up, introduced herself as a retired nurse. Nancy's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years, Betty said. Don't let her intimidate you. I'm not easily intimidated, Greg replied. But I am concerned about Lily. She notices more than people think. How old is she? Betty asked. She'll be 10 next Saturday. We're having a small party in the backyard, just a few kids from her class. You're welcome to stop by. I'd like that, Betty said. And don't worry about Nancy. She'll move on to someone else soon enough. But as Greg walked home in the fading evening light, he saw Nancy standing in her driveway across from his house. She was staring at his property, making notes on her ever-present clipboard. When she saw him watching, she didn't look away or pretend to be doing something else. Instead, she gave him a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Greg had seen that look before, in the eyes of defendants who didn't think the law applied to them. It was the look of someone who wouldn't back down easily. As a state attorney, he knew how to handle people like Nancy in court. As a father trying to give his daughter a normal life, he wasn't so sure. The morning of Lily's birthday dawned bright and clear. Greg woke up early to decorate the backyard before Lily got up. He hung streamers from the patio cover and set up a table for gifts. Joe and his wife Denise came over to help, bringing a happy birthday banner and a stack of party hats. "Thanks for this," Greg said as Joe held the ladder while he hung the last of the decorations. "No problem. Katie is excited for the party. She's been talking about it all week," Joe said, referring to his daughter who had become friends with Lily at school. Denise arranged cupcakes on a tray. "How many kids are coming?" 8 from her class plus a few of the neighbor kids, Greg said. "It's her first real birthday party since we moved here. She's been counting down the days." Inside the house, Greg heard Lily's bedroom door open. "That's her. Quick, act natural," he joked. Moments later, Lily appeared at the back door. She wore her favorite purple pajamas, and her brown hair was messy from sleep. The thin oxygen tube rested across her cheeks. When she saw the decorations, her eyes widened with delight. "Daddy, it looks amazing," she exclaimed, hurrying outside as fast as her condition allowed. Greg knelt down to hug her. "Happy birthday, sunshine. Double digits today." Lily spun around, slowly, taking in all the decorations. "Are those balloons on our mailbox too?" Greg nodded. "Special delivery balloons. I tied them there so your friends can find the house easily." "This is going to be the best day ever," Lily said, her face glowing with excitement. After breakfast, Greg helped Lily get ready for her party. He switched her to her portable oxygen tank, which was smaller and easier to carry around during activities. They had decorated it last night with stickers of stars and unicorns, turning the medical device into something that felt more like a fun accessory than a necessity. The first guests arrived at noon. Betty from the HOA meeting brought a gift wrapped in shiny paper and introduced herself to Lily as your dad's friend from the neighborhood. More children and parents followed, filling the backyard with laughter and conversation. Greg was setting up the scavenger hunt when he noticed Nancy Winters standing at his gate, clipboard in hand as always. He excused himself from the group of parents he was chatting with and walked over to her. "Nancy," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "This isn't a good time for HOA business." Nancy's lips were pressed into a thin line. "I've received noise complaints." Greg looked around at the children playing a quiet game of freeze tag. "The noise is well within acceptable levels, and I notified all immediate neighbors about the party, as per HOA guidelines. Those balloons on your mailbox are against Regulation 22C, Nancy continued, pointing to the colorful balloons Greg had tied there earlier. "No decorations are allowed on community mail receptacles." Before Greg could respond, Joe appeared at his side. "Hey Nancy, great to see you joining the celebration. Can I get you some cake?" Nancy ignored him. "Those will need to be removed immediately." Greg felt his patience slipping. "Nancy, it's my daughter's birthday party. The balloons will be gone by tonight. Surely the HOA can make an exception for a few hours on a special occasion." "Rules don't have exceptions, Mr. Porter. That's why they're rules." Nancy made a note on her clipboard. "Consider this a verbal warning. If they're not removed in 1 hour, I'll have to issue a formal violation." Several parents had noticed the conversation and were watching with concern. Greg didn't want to create a scene that would upset Lily or the other children. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll move them after the cake. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my daughter's party." Nancy gave a stiff nod and turned to leave, but not before surveying the backyard with disapproving eyes. Greg watched her walk down the sidewalk, her back rigid with righteous indignation. That woman needs a hobby that isn't terrorizing her. "Neighbors," Betty said, joining Greg by the fence. I think this is her hobby, Greg replied with a sigh. The party continued without further interruption. The children played games, ate cake, and cheered as Lily opened her presents. Greg took pictures of everything, knowing how much these moments meant to both of them. For a few hours, no one thought about oxygen levels or HOA violations. After the scavenger hunt, which ended with each child finding a goodie bag hidden in the yard, Lily was getting tired. Greg noticed her breathing was a bit labored and guided her to a chair on the patio. "You okay, sunshine?" he asked, checking her oxygen tank. "Just tired," Lily said. "Can I rest for a little bit?" "Of course." Greg adjusted her oxygen flow slightly. "Why don't you sit here while I get the cake ready, then we can do the candles." Lily nodded, settling back in the chair. Her oxygen tank sat on the patio table next to her, the stickers catching the sunlight. Greg went into the kitchen where Denise was putting candles on the cake. "She's getting tired," he told her. "I think we should do the cake soon and then start wrapping up." "No problem," Denise said. "Joe can help get the kids together." While they prepared the cake, Lily sat quietly on the patio, watching her friends play. She didn't notice Nancy Winters slip into the yard through the side gate that someone had left open. Nancy moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on the colorful tank on the table. Nancy had been watching the party from her car parked down the street. She had seen the violation, not just the balloons on the mailbox, but now this garish decorated container sitting in plain view. In her mind, this was exactly the kind of eyesore that brought down property values. The Porter family had been flaunting the rules since they arrived, and it was her duty to enforce them. She approached the table where Lily sat. The girl had her eyes closed, resting. Nancy reached for the tank, assuming it was some sort of party decoration or novelty item that Greg had refused to remove despite her warnings. In its place, she left one of the helium balloons that she had removed from the mailbox on her way in. A proper exchange, she thought smugly. Clutching the tank under her arm, Nancy hurried back toward the side gate. She would dispose of this unauthorized decoration in the community dumpster behind the clubhouse and leave another violation notice. Perhaps then Greg Porter would understand that no one was above the rules of Oakwood Heights. Inside the kitchen, Greg was lighting the candles on the cake when he heard a commotion from the backyard. Katie, Joe's daughter, ran into the kitchen. "Mr. Porter, Lily can't breathe," she cried, her eyes wide with panic. Greg dropped everything and rushed outside. Lily was gasping for air, her face turning pale. The oxygen tank was gone from the table, replaced by a single balloon. The cannula hung loosely from her nose, disconnected from its supply. "Lily!" Greg knelt beside her, his heart pounding with fear. "Where's your tank? What happened?" Lily couldn't answer. She was struggling to breathe, her lips taking on a bluish tint. "Call 911, Greg shouted to the adults rushing over. Betty pushed through the crowd. "I'm a nurse. Let me help." She quickly assessed Lily. "She needs oxygen now. Do you have a backup tank?" "In her room," Greg said, already running toward the house. "Joe, please stay with her." As Greg dashed inside, a neighbor named Pete, who lived 2 doors down, called out from the side yard. "Greg, I just saw Nancy Winters carrying something from your yard to the dumpsters." Greg froze for a split second as the realization hit him. Without hesitation, he changed direction and sprinted toward the community center. His mind raced with a mixture of fear for Lily and rage at what Nancy might have done. He found Nancy by the dumpsters behind the clubhouse, attempting to push something bulky inside a trash bag into the container. The distinctive shape of Lily's oxygen tank was visible through the plastic. "Nancy," Greg's voice echoed across the empty parking lot. "What have you done?" Nancy turned, startled by his approach. "Mr. Porter, I'm simply removing unauthorized decorations as per." Greg grabbed the bag from her hands and ripped it open, revealing Lily's oxygen tank with its colorful stickers. "This is my daughter's oxygen tank. She needs this to breathe." The color drained from Nancy's face. I thought it was a party decoration." She could die without this. Greg checked the tank quickly to make sure it was undamaged before turning. Back to Nancy. "You took this from my daughter who was sitting right there using it." "I didn't realize," Nancy began. But Greg was already running back toward his house, the tank clutched tightly in his hands. When he reached his backyard, he found Lily in Betty's arms. Someone had brought out her backup tank from the house, and the nurse had connected it. Lily's color was improving, but she looked frightened and confused. "Daddy," she whispered as he knelt beside her. "Someone took my tank." Greg gently reconnected her main tank after checking that it was still functioning properly. "I know, Sunshine, but it's back now, and you're going to be okay." As he held his daughter close, Greg looked up to see police cars pulling into his driveway, their lights flashing against the birthday decorations that now seemed from another world entirely. The emergency room was bright and noisy. Greg sat beside Lily's bed, holding her small hand while doctors checked her oxygen levels. The birthday party had ended in chaos, with frightened children being picked up early and police officers taking statements from witnesses in the backyard. Now, 3 hours later, Lily was stable but shaken by the experience. "Is Nancy going to jail?" Lily asked, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask the hospital had given her. Greg brushed her hair away from her forehead. "I don't know yet, Sunshine. The police are talking to her now." "She took my special tank," Lily said, "the one we put stickers on together." Greg felt a mix of anger and sadness. "I know, but you're safe now, and that's what matters." A doctor approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Porter, Lily's oxygen saturation is back to normal, but we'd like to keep her overnight for observation. Sometimes, these episodes can have delayed effects." Greg nodded. "Of course, whatever she needs." "Daddy, will you stay with me?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with worry. "I'm not going anywhere," Greg promised. After the doctor left, Greg stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. Joe answered immediately. "Greg, how's Lily doing?" Joe asked, concern evident in his voice. "She's stable. They're keeping her overnight to be safe," Greg replied, keeping his voice low. "What's happening there?" "The police are still interviewing neighbors. They took Nancy to the station about an hour ago. She kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that she thought the tank was an unauthorized decoration." Greg clenched his jaw. "She saw Lily using it. She knew exactly what it was." "Everyone here knows that too," Joe assured him. "Pete told the police he saw Nancy watching your house from her car before she snuck in. And Betty gave them a statement about how dangerous it was to disconnect Lily's oxygen." "Thanks for handling things there," Greg said. "Could you or Denise grab Lily's overnight bag from her closet? It has her medication and things she'll need." "Already on it." Denise packed it and will bring it over in a few minutes. Greg ended the call and leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping him going was wearing off, leaving him drained. For the first time since the incident, he had a moment to process what had happened. Nancy Winters had deliberately taken a medical device from a child, risking Lily's life over petty HOA rules. As both a father and a state attorney, Greg knew this went far beyond a neighborly dispute. This was criminal endangerment. When he returned to Lily's room, she had fallen asleep, her breathing steady under the oxygen mask. Greg sat in the chair beside her bed and pulled out his phone. He had 7 missed calls from the district attorney's office. As a state attorney, Greg usually prosecuted cases himself, but this situation required him to recuse himself due to his direct involvement. He returned the call to District Attorney Carol Simmons, his boss and mentor. "Greg, I just heard what happened," Carol said when she answered. "How is Lily?" "She's stable. We're at Memorial Hospital for the night," Greg replied. "Carol, I know I need to step back from this officially, but—" "Already handled," Carol interrupted. "I've assigned Kate Rodriguez to the case. She's our best prosecutor for cases involving child endangerment." Greg felt a wave of relief. Kate was tough and thorough, exactly who he would have chosen himself. "Nancy Winters is being processed now," Carol continued. "The charges are reckless endangerment, tampering with medical equipment, and trespassing. Initial bail hearing is tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Greg said simply. "Take care of Lily," Carol replied, "and Greg, try to remember you're the victim's father here, not the prosecutor. Let us handle the legal side." After hanging up, Greg sat watching Lily sleep until Joe and Denise arrived with her overnight bag. They brought a stuffed unicorn from her room and some leftover cupcakes from the party. "How are you holding up?" Denise asked, giving Greg a hug. "I'm angry," Greg admitted, "and scared about what could have happened if we hadn't found the tank quickly." Joe nodded grimly. "The whole neighborhood is in shock. Even the people who put up with Nancy's behavior for years are saying this crossed a line. They stayed until a nurse came to check on Lily, then left with promises to help in any way they could." Greg settled in for a long night, dozing occasionally, in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Morning came with improved news. Lily's oxygen levels remained stable, and the doctor said she could go home that afternoon if all went well. Greg was helping her eat breakfast when his phone rang with a call from Kate Rodriguez. "Greg, I wanted to update you before the bail hearing," Kate said. "Nancy Winters was booked last night on all charges. Her attorney is Alan Gray. He's already trying to spin this as a well-meaning mistake." Greg wasn't surprised. Alan Gray was known for defending wealthy clients and HOA boards. What's their defense strategy? They're claiming she genuinely thought the tank was a decoration and had no idea it was medical equipment, Kate explained. "But we have your previous emails to the HOA board explicitly mentioning Lily's condition and her need for oxygen support. Plus multiple witnesses saw Lily using the tank during the party. Don't forget the security cameras," Greg added. "I installed them after the third HOA violation notice. They should have footage of Nancy entering the yard and taking the tank." There was a pause on the line. "You have video? That's excellent, Greg. Can you send that footage to my office right away?" "I'll have Joe check my home system and forward whatever it captured," Greg promised. After ending the call, Greg reached out to Joe, who agreed to access the security system and send the footage to the DA's office. Within an hour, Joe called, back with news. "Greg, the cameras caught everything," Joe said excitedly. "Nancy walking into your yard, taking the tank while looking directly at Lily and replacing it with a balloon. There's no way she can claim she didn't know what she was doing." Relief washed over Greg. That should help the prosecution. Later that morning, while Lily was being examined by a respiratory specialist, Greg received another call from Kate. "The bail hearing just ended," she reported. "Nancy was released on $50,000 bail with conditions. She can't leave the county or contact you or Lily in any way." "So she's back in the neighborhood?" Greg asked, concerned. "Yes, but she's under strict orders to stay away from your property," Kate assured him. "We've scheduled the preliminary hearing for next week. With the video evidence and witness statements, I'm confident we have a strong case." When Greg told Lily they could go home that afternoon, her first question surprised him. "Can we still live in our house, even with Nancy there?" Greg sat on the edge of her bed. "Of course we can. Our house is our home. Nancy can't come near us, and lots of neighbors are watching out for us now." Lily seemed to consider this. "Will I still have my birthday presents?" Greg smiled and hugged her. "Absolutely. And we'll have a do-over party when you're feeling better." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Greg's phone buzzed with text messages from neighbors offering help and support. Betty would bring dinner that night. Joe and Denise had collected Lily's gifts and cleaned up the party decorations. Even Frank, the retired judge from the HOA board, had sent a message condemning Nancy's actions and offering to testify if needed. The community was rallying around them, showing that Nancy Winters didn't represent the spirit of Oakwood Heights. Count. The drive home, Greg noticed a small crowd gathered near his house. For a moment he tensed, wondering if there was trouble. Then he saw the signs. "Get well soon, Lily, and we stand with the Porters." Neighbors had organized a welcome home greeting for Lily. Children from her class held handmade cards. Parents stood with serious expressions, nodding respectfully to Greg as he drove past. As he helped Lily from the car, she saw the gathering and whispered, "They came for me." "They sure did," Greg said, his throat tight with emotion. "Looks like we have more friends here than we realized." Inside the house, they found the living room cleaned and organized. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the coffee table with a note. "Thinking of you both. Your Oakwood Heights family." For the first time since moving to the neighborhood, Greg truly felt they belonged. It had taken a crisis to reveal it, but beneath the strict rules and perfect lawns, there was a real community here. One that would stand up for what was right, when it mattered most. As Lily settled on the couch with her new stuffed unicorn, Greg checked his email to find the preliminary hearing had been scheduled. The case of the state versus Nancy Winters would begin next Monday morning. The legal battle was just beginning. The county courthouse was busy on Monday morning. Greg sat in the front row of the courtroom, his posture straight and his expression serious. It felt strange to be on this side of the proceedings after years of standing at the prosecutor's table. Today, Kate Rodriguez would represent the state while Greg was here as Lily's father and the reporting witness. Lily had stayed home with Betty, who had offered to watch her during the hearing. Greg didn't want his daughter to relive the trauma of what happened, or to face Nancy Winters again so soon. The courtroom doors opened, and Nancy entered with her attorney, Alan Gray. She wore a conservative blue dress and had styled her hair carefully. Greg noticed she had chosen an outfit that made her look more like a friendly grandmother than the rigid HOA president he knew. It was a calculated choice, no doubt suggested by her lawyer. Nancy avoided looking in Greg's direction as she took her seat at the defense table. Alan Gray, however, nodded curtly to Greg before opening his briefcase. Judge Maria Vasquez entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. After the formal opening of the proceedings, Kate Rodriguez stood to present the state's case. Your Honor, the state charges Nancy Winters with reckless endangerment of a minor, tampering with medical equipment, and criminal trespassing. On May 17th, the defendant entered the Porter family's property without permission, took a life-sustaining oxygen tank from 9-year-old Lily Porter, and replaced it with a helium balloon. This deliberate action put the child's life at risk and required emergency medical intervention. Kate presented the security camera footage, which clearly showed Nancy entering the yard, taking the tank while looking directly at Lily, and leaving, with it hidden under her arm. The courtroom was silent as the video played, the evidence damning in its clarity. Next, Kate called the emergency room doctor who had treated Lily. Dr. Susan Chen explained the medical risks of oxygen deprivation for a child with Lily's condition. Even a few minutes without supplemental oxygen could have caused permanent damage to her brain or heart, Dr. Chen testified. In my professional opinion, removing the oxygen tank was extremely dangerous and could have been fatal if the child hadn't received prompt medical attention. Throughout the morning, Kate called several more witnesses: Joe Martinez, who testified about Nancy's history of harassment; Betty, who described the medical emergency from her perspective as a nurse; and Pete, who had seen Nancy watching the house before entering the yard. During a brief recess, Greg stepped outside the courtroom to call and check on Lily. Betty assured him that she was doing well, playing with her toys and asking when her dad would be home. She's a strong kid, Betty said, braver than most adults I know. When court resumed, it was the defense's turn. Alan Gray approached the witness stand with a confident stride. The state would have you believe my client deliberately endangered a child's life, he began. But the reality is much simpler. Mrs. Winters was performing her duty as HOA president by removing an unauthorized decoration from a common area. Alan called Nancy to the stand. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she took her seat. Mrs. Winters, please tell the court about your role in the Oakwood Heights community, Alan prompted. I've been the Homeowners Association president for 11 years, Nancy said, her voice carefully controlled. I take my responsibilities very seriously. Our community standards are what keep our neighborhood beautiful and our property values high. And on the day in question, what did you believe you were removing from the Porter property? Nancy straightened in her chair. I thought it was some sort of decorated container that violated our guidelines about yard decorations. It had stickers all over it, and it didn't look like medical equipment to me. Greg clenched his jaw, remembering how Lily had proudly decorated her tank to make it feel less medical and more like a normal part of her life. Did you intend to harm Lily Porter? Alan asked. Of course not. Nancy looked shocked at the suggestion. I would never hurt a child. I simply thought I was enforcing the rules that everyone in our community agrees to follow. Alan presented emails from the HOA board, showing complaints about unsightly objects in Greg's yard, carefully avoiding any that specifically mentioned medical equipment. He was trying to build a case that Nancy had acted in good faith, based on these complaints. When cross-examination began, Kate approached Nancy with a folder of documents. "Mrs. Winters, I have here an email sent by Mr. Porter to the HOA board 3 months ago, clearly explaining his daughter's medical condition and her need for oxygen support. Your reply is attached, acknowledging receipt of this information." "Did you receive and read this email?" Nancy shifted uncomfortably. "I receive many emails as HOA president. Please answer the question," Judge Vasquez instructed. "Yes, I received it," Nancy admitted. Kate handed the judge another document. "I also have the minutes from an HOA meeting where Mr. Porter specifically discussed his daughter's medical equipment. You were present at this meeting and even commented on the topic. Is that correct?" Nancy's confident facade began to crack. "There are many topics at our meetings. The minutes show you specifically asked if the equipment could be less visible from the street," Kate pressed. Alan Gray objected, but Judge Vasquez overruled him. Kate continued, "Mrs. Winters, the security footage shows you looking directly at Lily while she was wearing her oxygen cannula, connected to the tank you then removed. Are you claiming you didn't notice the tube running from the tank to the child's nose?" Nancy's face flushed. I wasn't paying attention to that. You also claimed you thought this was a decoration in a common area, but the footage clearly shows you taking it from a private backyard during a birthday party to which you were not invited. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Before Nancy could answer, Alan Gray stood to object again. "Your Honor, counsel is badgering the witness. I'm simply asking Mrs. Winters to reconcile her testimony with the video evidence," Kate responded calmly. "Overruled," Judge Vasquez said. "The witness will answer the question." Nancy looked flustered. "I was doing my job as HOA president. Your job includes entering private property without permission and taking items being actively used by residents?" Kate asked. "Objection," Alan called. "Withdrawn," Kate said, but the damage was done. The contradiction was clear to everyone in the courtroom. After a few more witnesses, including Frank, the retired judge from the HOA board who testified that Nancy's actions were not authorized or approved by the board, both sides presented their closing arguments. Alan Gray painted Nancy as a dedicated community volunteer who had made an honest mistake in her zeal to maintain neighborhood standards. Kate Rodriguez emphasized the deliberate nature of Nancy's actions and the serious harm that could have resulted. Judge Vasquez considered the evidence before speaking. "Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to bind this case over for trial. The defendant will remain free on bail under the previously established conditions. Trial is set for 3 weeks from today." As the courtroom began to clear, Greg noticed several of his neighbors had come to observe the proceedings. They nodded to him supportively as he passed. Outside the courthouse, Kate pulled Greg aside. "That went well for us. The security footage is compelling, and Nancy didn't do herself any favors on the stand." "What happens next?" Greg asked. "My office will prepare for trial, but don't be surprised if Gray approaches us about a plea deal. The evidence is strong and they know it." Greg nodded. "I need to get home to Lily." As he walked to his car, Greg saw Nancy and her attorney having an intense conversation by their vehicle. Nancy looked upset, gesturing angrily at Alan Gray. When she noticed Greg watching, she quickly got into her car and drove away. On the drive home, Greg called Carol, the district attorney, to thank her for assigning Kate to the case. "She's doing an excellent job," Greg said. "How are you holding up?" Carol asked. "It's not easy being on that side of the courtroom." "It's strange," Greg admitted, "but I'm focused on Lily and making sure something like this never happens to another family." When Greg arrived home, he found Lily and Betty making cookies in the kitchen. The sight of his daughter smiling and covered in flour was the perfect antidote to the tension of the courtroom. "Daddy," Lily called out, "we're making smiley face cookies. Do you want to help?" Greg hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of cookie dough and childhood. "I'd love to, sunshine." As they decorated cookies together, Greg's phone rang with a call from Joe. "Greg, you need to know what's happening," Joe said urgently. "Nancy called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. Word is she's trying to gather support and paint herself as the victim of a misunderstanding. She's claiming you're using your position as a state attorney to persecute her for doing her job." Greg sighed. Nancy was still fighting, still unwilling, to accept responsibility for her actions. The battle was far from over. The 3 weeks leading up to the trial passed quickly. Greg balanced caring for Lily with helping Kate prepare their case. The incident had changed their lives in unexpected ways. Neighbors who had once been strangers now dropped by with meals, or offered to watch Lily when Greg needed to meet with the prosecution team. The community had united around them, with one notable exception. Nancy Winters had not gone quietly. After failing to gain support at the emergency HOA meeting where most residents had openly criticized her actions, she began a different approach. She gave an interview to a local news station, claiming she was being unfairly targeted by a powerful state attorney who was using his influence to turn a simple misunderstanding into a criminal case. Greg had declined to comment publicly, focusing instead on protecting Lily from the growing media attention. He installed better security cameras and made sure Lily was never alone outside, just in case Nancy violated her bail conditions. On the morning of the trial, Greg helped Lily get ready for school. She would stay with Joe and Denise after classes rather than come to the courthouse. "Are you sure you're okay going to school today?" Greg asked as he packed her lunch. Lily nodded. "Ms. Johnson said we're starting our science project today. I don't want to miss it." Greg smiled at his daughter's resilience. "Okay, sunshine. But call me if you need anything, and remember that Joe will pick you up instead of me. Because you'll be at court making sure Nancy gets in trouble for taking my tank," Lily said matter-of-factly. Greg knelt to her level. "The court will decide what happens to Nancy. My job is just to tell the truth about what happened." "Will she go to jail?" Lily asked. "I don't know," Greg answered honestly. "That's up to the judge." After dropping Lily at school, Greg drove to the courthouse. The parking lot was fuller than usual, with several news vans parked near the entrance. The case had attracted attention beyond their community, touching on issues of medical rights, HOA powers, and child safety. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Greg spotted Betty, Frank, and several other neighbors in the audience. Kate was already at the prosecution table, organizing her notes. Nancy sat beside Alan Gray, wearing a conservative suit and a somber expression. Judge Vasquez entered, and the court was called to order. The jury, selected the previous week, filed in and took their seats. After opening instructions, Kate rose to present the state's case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about a child whose life was endangered by the deliberate actions of Nancy Winters. The defendant removed a medical device that 9-year-old Lily Porter needed to breathe, replacing it with a balloon, and then attempted to dispose of the device in a dumpster. The evidence will show that Mrs. Winters knew about Lily's condition, knew the purpose of the oxygen tank, and still chose to remove it, putting the child's life at risk to enforce her interpretation of homeowners association rules." Kate presented the timeline of events, calling Greg as her first witness. Under oath, he described the birthday party, Lily's medical needs, and the moment they discovered her oxygen tank was missing. "How did you feel when you realized the tank was gone?" Kate asked. Greg took a deep breath. "Terrified. My daughter couldn't breathe properly, and I didn't know where her oxygen supply was or who had taken it." "Had you ever informed Mrs. Winters about Lily's medical condition and her need for oxygen?" "Multiple times," Greg confirmed, in emails at HOA meetings and in person when she complained about the appearance of Lily's medical equipment. Alan Gray's cross-examination tried to paint Greg as using his position as a state attorney to influence the case, but Greg remained calm and factual in his responses. Throughout the day, Kate called other witnesses, the emergency room doctor, Betty, Joe, and the police officers who had responded to the scene. The security camera footage was played again, showing Nancy's deliberate actions in taking the tank. On the second day of the trial, Alan Gray presented the defense case. Nancy took the stand, presenting herself as a dedicated volunteer who had made an honest mistake. "I truly believed I was removing an unauthorized decoration," she insisted. I had no idea it was medical equipment. During cross-examination, Kate methodically dismantled this claim. Mrs. Winters, can you explain why you didn't approach Mr. Porter or any other adult at the party before removing this item? Kate asked. Nancy shifted uncomfortably. I didn't want to disrupt the celebration. So instead you entered private property without permission, took an item that was clearly in use, and then attempted to hide it in a dumpster, Kate pressed. Does that sound like the actions of someone enforcing legitimate rules? Before Nancy could answer, Kate presented a series of emails Nancy had sent to other HOA board members, complaining specifically about the Porter girl's medical devices creating an eyesore. The emails directly contradicted Nancy's claim that she didn't know what the tank was. Nancy's face flushed as Kate read the damning messages aloud. I have no further questions for this witness, Kate said, returning to her seat. After a few character witnesses for Nancy, who were effectively cross-examined by Kate, both sides presented their closing arguments. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching a verdict. As everyone returned to the courtroom, Greg felt a strange calmness. Whatever the outcome, he had done everything possible to protect Lily and to make sure Nancy was held accountable for her actions. On the count of reckless endangerment of a minor, how do you find? Judge Vasquez asked the jury foreperson. We find the defendant guilty, the foreperson stated clearly. On the count of tampering with medical equipment, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of criminal trespassing, how do you find? Guilty. Nancy's face went pale. Alan Gray immediately began whispering to her about appeal options. Judge Vasquez scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following week, and Nancy was led away by court officers, her bail revoked due to the severity of the convictions. Outside the courthouse, Greg faced a crowd of reporters with Kate beside him. Justice was served today, Kate stated. The jury recognized that no homeowners association rule can ever justify endangering a child's life. Greg added a brief statement. My family is grateful for the support we've received from our neighbors and friends. We hope this verdict sends a clear message about respecting medical needs and keeping children safe. A week later, Greg and Lily sat in the courtroom for Nancy's sentencing. Judge Vasquez reviewed the case details before addressing Nancy directly. Mrs. Winters, your actions displayed a disturbing disregard for a child's life and safety. While you maintain this was a misunderstanding, the evidence clearly shows you knew about Lily Porter's condition and deliberately took actions that put her at serious risk. The judge continued. I sentence you to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. During your probation, you will perform 500 hours of community service working with organizations that support children with medical needs. You are permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board. Additionally, you will pay restitution for Lily Porter's medical expenses resulting from this incident. As Nancy was led away, Lily tugged on Greg's sleeve. Is it over, now, Daddy? Greg nodded. Yes, sunshine, it's over. In the months that followed, Oakwood Heights changed significantly. Frank was elected as the new HOA president, and his first action was to rewrite the community guidelines to specifically protect residents with medical needs. The Lily Porter rule gave automatic exemptions for necessary medical equipment and accommodations. Greg became an advocate for HOA reform beyond his own community. He worked with state legislators to draft a bill limiting HOA powers when it came to medical necessities and reasonable accommodations. The bill, nicknamed Lily's Law, passed with overwhelming support. 1 year after the incident, the Porters hosted a community picnic in their backyard. Lily, now using oxygen only at night thanks to successful treatment, ran around with friends from school. Neighbors chatted and shared food, no longer strangers, but a true community. As Greg watched his daughter laugh and play, he reflected on how something so terrible had ultimately created something good. A neighborhood that understood what really mattered wasn't perfectly trimmed lawns or matching mailboxes, but looking out for each other when it counted most.